Thanks very much for agreeing to take part in this. So for London Climate Action Week, we're running these series of critical conversations, climate action for associations, as you know.
Yeah.
And we thought that today we would interview you, if that's all right.
Of course, yeah. Delighted.
Andrew Crudgington, you're the Climate Change Associate at the Chartered Institution of Highways and Transportation. I'm just going to do a bit of a spiel about the institution, if that's all right. So charity, Royal Charter, a learned society, representing and qualifies professionals who plan, design, build, manage, maintain, operate, transport and infrastructure. Your roots as an institution are in highways engineering, but you're very rapidly expanding to all aspects of transport infrastructure.
Sorry.
Wow.
Yes.
So I know your role, you're specifically being recruited by the institution as Climate Change Associate to support the institution with its response in terms of its sectoral response. But I guess the place to start is, for me, it's a bit of a wow question because it's so big, is that obviously transport as one of the biggest emitters or biggest emitting industries and sectors, and I guess as a result of that, professions. How are you responding? Talk to me.
I suppose your kind of wow is quite instructive, because obviously when I sort of took on the role, perhaps a sort of similar thought occurred to me, because as you say, well, in some ways it's almost even worse or even better in terms of the challenge than that, because as well as transportation itself, the emissions from surface transport being at least in the UK the biggest single source of emissions. Actually, the people we qualify, well, the engineers in our membership, the chartered engineers in our membership, are the people doing the kind of construction and maintenance of the highway of highways and rail and other transport infrastructure. So actually that kind of construction and manufacturing part of the economy as well is a pretty enormous. Well, it's the second biggest source of emissions in the UK. So when you look at it, you think this is an enormous challenge, which I guess is in part why as a profession we recognise this is pretty existential for us. It's you can sort of throw language like generational challenge around too easily, but genuinely in our case it really is, because it's a fundamental challenge to how both the kind of transportation planning side of things and the transport operations side, but also the construction and maintenance side of our membership do things. So so I'm not sure I'm quite answering the question here, but that kind of gives you a sense of the scale and the seriousness of which we're taking it. I guess what we've been trying to do through dialogue of our members, what I've been trying to do the last couple of months since I joined the CIHT with dialogue of our members, is against that kind of enormous potential kind of size of the challenge, to kind of get an understanding of what are the kind of, perhaps I don't know if immediate is the right word, but perhaps both the immediate and biggest challenges that the sector face, and understanding that from the different perspectives within the membership, and then kind of asking the kind of the killer question of, and where do you think CIHT as your professional body can have the greatest influence, the greatest positive influence, because we don't want to limited resources for everybody. We don't want to chase after every single possible avenue where we might have nugatory influence or do something that's not going to make a great deal of impact on the climate challenge. So I suppose it's almost kind of strategy 101, giving people a kind of two by two box and say what's important for you, where can we have an influence, and trying to understand what's in that top right hand corner, and perhaps in what order we should do it as well, because again, this is not a project you do in 6 months. This is a 5, 10, 20 year generational program. So does that right. sort of start to answer the question?
Yeah, I guess it does. And is there a top down, bottom up driver? Because obviously there's changes to targets and it's been set. I mean, I'm not the expert, but been set it feels like every time leaders meet, there seems to be a more of a squeeze on targets around these emissions. So how are you responding to that, challenge?
Well, it's certainly pretty helpful actually to have that in the UK, because it's not only that we have the kind of the top line target, the net zero by 2050 piece. We have carbon budgets as well, and we have the analysis from the Committee for Climate Change, which is the kind of government statutory advisor. So for surface transport, we've got kind of interim targets in 2035 as well. So that is really helpful in terms of the kind of sort of top down piece, because you almost cut all the argument out. You cut all the abstract argument. You say, well, okay, look, the government's legislated for this. It's the law, and in 2035 we legislated for this, and we're trying to reduce demand for transport by X. We're trying to reduce emissions associated with materials by Y. Can we collaborate around how to do this rather than going back to first principles constantly? So I think that's been hugely helpful in the UK. Certainly helped me in my work, because you can start the conversation and with those kind of conversations with okay, we've got a shared challenge here. It's not really negotiable. So let's get straight down to the conversation about how we do something about it.
Yeah. So practically, how are you putting it into practice, or how have you started to put it into practice? Because obviously, as you say, this is a long-term, I guess, seismic change, really, isn't it? What are you doing to start having? I guess it's providing the information, but also
So as I said, I was keen to make sure I understood what the members saw as a priority, because I didn't want to, and the institution didn't want to come in and say, almost kind of descend from the mountain Moses-like and say, we think this is what you must do. So I spent the first couple of months in the role just having an awful lot of one-to-one conversations with members in all sorts of different sorts of organisations. Transportation is quite an interesting sector in that you've got very big players like the kind of Arabs and the AECOMs, who are these kind of global multinational organisations, right down to some quite small sort of 2 or 3 person planning consultancies or tech providers who are again sort of essentially startups. So the world looks quite different from those different perspectives. So I wanted to understand all of that before we marched in. But having had that first round of conversations, perhaps unsurprisingly, but where we've come to is the first step is what we are calling, and most people call, helping the sector with carbon literacy. I guess what we mean by that is there is some kind of basic knowledge that we think all professionals need to have about the science, and in the UK's case, the legislation. I think we've got a problem in our sector, and I'm sure it's shared in others, with around sort of language and lexicon. So people use, we refer around kind of net zero, carbon neutral, different things. And we've got a similar thing about measurement as well. So, are we measuring the same thing? So, and again, I'm not sure if there's a bit of gaming going on or it's genuine confusion, but sometimes you think people are declaring scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, but not scope 3. So is this a level playing field? And so on and so forth. So all this kind of stuff, which is quite basic. So we're thinking about, so our first step is to kind of understand what carbon literacy means for us as a transportation profession, and make sure we're doing all we can to provide members with the support to get up to that basic standard of carbon literacy. The other thing I want to do as part of that is, I guess, sort of carbon literacy plus. And this is, about having a kind of scalable program, in that if you think about the kind of, the life cycle of transport infrastructure, there's different roles at different parts of that life cycle in the kind of planning and design and implementation and operation. And some of those roles have greater influence over carbon emissions than others. So we want to start by identifying, perhaps 1 or 2 of those roles that we think are particularly key, and providing those people in those roles with a pathway to kind of advanced carbon literacy or some high level of carbon expertise. And if we can make that work and understand how to do that, we'd like to kind of keep running a scalable program to offer that kind of advanced pathway for more and more kind of job roles or groups of roles within the profession. so that over time we can get people from basic literacy to, I don't know, advanced practitioner. I haven't quite come up with the word yet for the at the higher level. But it's gold, silver, bronze. I don't know.
Now I guess that's really interesting. Which just brings to mind. I just came off a CAFA critical conversation with Ben Wilmot from the CIHT, who was talking about workforce planning and skills being absolutely critical. And obviously he was coming at it from the role of a people professional and HR in terms of what the things that they need to consider for their organizations going forward. But it's true of every sector and every profession in the transition, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And in particular, the skills, the advanced pathways that you've just talked about, and the skills is fundamental. I guess it's the foundation.
And I think so. And I think, sorry, cut across you there, Ali. Sorry.
That's okay.
No, I was going to say, I think the other thing from a professional body perspective as well is that, if we can identify those kind of critical roles, or start to identify those critical roles, and start to provide that level of support, it also allows us to, it also gives us communities of practice who we can mobilise to do work in other areas. Because I know from the consultation I've done there are sort of huge issues around things like procurement in the sector, how transport schemes are assessed, all sorts of different best practice issues, where we're going to have to mobilise members with expertise to develop new codes of practice and so on and so forth. And we've got a much better chance of doing that as a professional body if we've gone through the kind of process I've just described, because we'll have created those communities of practice and we'll know who the expert practitioners are in the membership.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, you just touched on a few of the other areas, but obviously collaborating and partnering is key, isn't it? Because it's not in one dimensional profession in the industry. It's the relationships that you're going to have to build to deliver change is huge.
Yeah, and I think again, I suppose you can see that as part of the skills piece, but that's saying that kind of collaboration piece is enormous. Both across the profession and the professions, but with the public as well, and taking the public with you. So I think a big part of the skill set is around communication and collaboration. In some ways, I suppose it's a statement of bleeding obvious, but certainly in the kind of broader construction and infrastructure world, perhaps it's not always been our strength. As you probably know from your long career talking to professional bodies in that space. So out width of the carbon piece, this is a huge challenge for us. Just on very simple things like we know we need to collaborate around data if we're going to make progress in the net zero piece. But that there's just huge numbers of private pools of data. We don't always have the kind of protocols in place for sharing data effectively across, or even within projects, but certainly between the parties on projects. There's big ambitions in the sector to kind of develop a kind of network of linked up digital twins, so you can get data from across different infrastructure assets and understand how they're interacting, and there'd be huge opportunities for carbon reduction there. But we just need to kind of crack just some quite kind of basic some basic issues around kind of sort of data collection, data quality, data sharing protocols, all this kind of stuff, which I suppose is it's sort of quite, it sounds quite sort of techie and dull, but it's so vital to get it right.
Critical. And I guess critical to winning that infrastructure work in the first place, isn't it, in terms of the supply chain and the contracting environment as well, that I would imagine is quite rife in your industry and your sector. I think it's I guess one of the big one of the sort of big challenges for us is the kind of structure of the sector, I guess. So we do have long disaggregated supply chains, quite complex relationships. A lot of the expertise is sort of down in what we tend to call sort of tier 3, tier 4 of the supply chain, which are often quite small organizations with few resources. Small businesses.
Small businesses essentially. So aligning all of those people around the kind of common goal, around a common in a common data environment, under a contractual regime that actually supports collaboration. Yeah, of course, these are big challenges. Yeah.
So what's next for CIHT? I know that you've got you're part of a COP26 virtual pavilion. Is that correct?
That's right.
Developing other relationships. How is that? Do you want to talk through that? How is that working for you?
Yeah. So you touched on earlier that it's not something we can do alone. So I think there probably are things. Well, I've just talked about the kind of carbon literacy piece that is sort of a lever that we control directly, and we must. And we've got a responsibility to move forward on that. So, that's the immediate priority. But we recognise that we need to be part of a wider collective. So we've been looking to try and understand where we sort of fit in the kind of Venn diagram, I guess, and which of the kind of multitude of initiatives we need to contribute to. So yes, we're part of the UK Green Building Council's. Well, it's initiated by the UK Green Building Council, but it's the kind of built environment virtual pavilion for COP. So it's a huge collaboration. I don't have in front of me the number of organisations collaborating, but it's a large number, Ali, of organisations collaborating.
I think there's 20 to 30 involved in that collaboration.
Yeah. So so there's sort of two elements of that. There's two elements of that at COP in the virtual pavilion, which we hope too will have a physical presence in the COP hall, but. Recognising that the numbers are limited at COP, it's going to be online as well. So there's going to be an exhibition, which I hope will be really kind of visual, really engaging of buildings and infrastructure projects that have really moved the dial over the last on carbon. But there's also going to be a conference program, panels of really kind of high quality speakers, which we hope both the attendees at COP will engage with, but also the kind of wider built environment community. So that's a kind of big piece of work that we're one of the smaller partners. So I won't claim all the credit for it. UK GBC have done a huge amount of work, but we're hoping that we can bring with a few others the infrastructure perspective to that built environment pavilion, because clearly buildings don't sit in isolation. They sit in a context. They're joined up by infrastructure. So it's important we get both parts of the whole right.
No, absolutely. It sounds fantastic. So only got a couple of minutes left of the conversation today, but thanks very much, Andrew, for taking the time. We've obviously got 8.5 years roughly before 2030.
Right.
You can wave a magic wand.
Yeah.
If you could fast track yourself to then and then look back on your journey, what do you see?
That's a good question. What do I see? I have to be optimistic, don't I? And shed my English gloom.
You can be whatever you want.
No, I guess in our sector, because it's fundamental, I think what I would like to see would be that, I guess, everybody. This is going to sound a bit light, but at least in the first instance, I'd like to see that kind of everybody has got it. That there is sort of no debate in the higher ends of the sector about whether carbon is a overarching priority, and then I'd love to have seen that flowed through into just the kind of standard operating procedures, how we do things. So I'd like to see all planning decisions, all procurement models, etc., have carbon principles firmly embedded in them in a way that perhaps they don't now. Certainly in the highways space, we're going to see we need to see a huge uptake in the use of electric vehicles. We've got the UK government has announced that it will ban the sale of new diesel and petrol cars from 2032. So there's a huge job of work for us to do in the sector to kind of prepare the highways network for that. There's a huge amount of charging infrastructure to be put in place, for instance. So so I want to see kind of physical changes to the highways network by 2030. But it's not just a tech fix. We won't get there just by a tech fix. So at the same time, I'd like to have seen as a sector, and probably as a country, kind of bite the bullet on behaviour change as well, and kind of accepted that we need to kind of alter our transport our transport behaviour. Does that kind of give you an answer?
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. And I guess it leaves me with a point around choice, you know, personal choices and business choices, and you know, running responsible businesses more broadly, in that, you know, the face of travel and the way we travel and the way businesses treat transportation and logistics and needs and requirements is going to change fundamentally as well over the next decade. So there's a whole I guess, realm of opportunities for us. But Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you, Ali.
Today. Really appreciate it. And yeah, and we also know that the institution is part of Climate Action for Associations Collective as well, and that's a whole different side of your business that's obviously looking at what you're doing internally around climate change and responsibility. But today we've obviously been talking about the membership and the industry as a whole. But thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Always good to talk to you.
Thank you, Ali. All the best.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.